Okay, just doing a quick audio test and video test, making sure everything's okay before we start. You guys able to see this over here? Yeah, exactly. Rails, what's that for? So I just want to confirm with Calgary before we start that everything's good to go, that we're ready to go. Audio, video, all good. How's everybody's week 7 going so far? How's the Rails gig? Well, there's one terrible and mostly good or silence, which I don't know what to make of. It's very early to say is probably what your answer should be. You're only in like second day of Rails, so you've done one full day of Rails. I mean, sure, you can count active record as a day of Rails. Maybe debatable because it was originally part of Rails. It's a standalone library now, right? Similar to Connects, but a little bit further along in terms of how much it abstracts for you. So active record you spent, one day with? And got to get introduced, not specifically, again, you're not here to learn about active record or learn about Rails. You're here to learn about these patterns and how to learn them quickly and how to adapt, right? So with the active record, for example, it was about ORMs, object relation mappings, which are very common in web applications specifically, but also in other types of applications. And only specifically used when you're using what type of database? A relational database, right? It wouldn't necessarily make sense for like a Mongo type database to have an ORM. At least that's my understanding of it, because it maps objects to relations. Now there would be convenient libraries for things like Mongo or other types of databases, but they wouldn't be called ORMs. At least that's not what I would call them. So it sounds like Calgary's all good. They hopefully heard all of that. And hopefully they'll be more engaged, right? You guys were awesome last time. The last time I had a lecture with you guys was in like week 2. So you guys have been lucky, right? Haven't had to deal with my rambling and all of that stuff. Hopefully it's been a good experience so far. Not just with week 7, but in class so far. Like, are you guys feeling good about everything? That's awesome. So yeah, unfortunately you have me today. And I'm supposed to start off with a joke usually, right? And I try to make it relevant to like the stuff that you've learned so far. So I've got a SQL joke. Have I told you guys the SQL joke that I love? SQL statement walks into a bar, walks up to 2 tables and says, "May I join you?" That's the punchline right there. Web developer walks into a bar right after. Same bar. Storms out. Goes, "Too many tables, I can't handle the complexity." So that's the jokes. Kick off this beautiful lecture here. So yeah, Rails Day 2. Have you guys read what's Compass saying about the lecture? That's okay, because I've done this lecture a few times now. And I take a slightly different approach, even though I wrote the thing that's in there. And it seems to go well. So you're in Rails Day 2. You've had a day of working with the MVC framework and even getting comfortable with MVC. So we're not going to go crazy fast. I'm not going to assume you know a lot or are very comfortable with MVC or any of that. My assumptions are still, when I'm drawing parallels, I'll try to draw parallels with like Express and things of that nature. You had class with Nima yesterday, right? How was that? Good? A good introduction to Rails? Did it help with the day? A little bit? That's good. What's something I always emphasize? I know you guys have only had me for lecture, twice? What's my mantra for like the things you should be focusing on and therefore the things I focus on when I'm up here? What do I try to focus on? Learning to learn. In other words, being comfortable with being uncomfortable. You remember that from day 1. What else? In terms of my lecture style, it doesn't focus as much on learning Rails, for example, as much as it is on learning to learn or approach as a developer. Your iterative approach, for example, right? Even with ours or others like walkthroughs or tutorials, if you're just following them with blinders on and just kind of following and reading along, I'd argue you're not doing it well enough. Why would I argue that? Because, again, I'm going to show you how to kind of approach building a feature in Rails, and we'll do that together today, because from what I understand, and pretty commonly, the first lecture on Rails isn't very code heavy, right? It's more of a walkthrough, right? Whereas today, we'll do more of like, okay, cool, let's build a feature together and see how like KV suggests that we build features, whether it's in Rails or any kind of uncertain environment where we're still learning the thing. And so of course, the goal is not to build a feature, and I don't care how far we get into the feature. It's more about using that as a vehicle to have conversations, right? Discuss how to go about inspecting something, how far to go, when to say, okay, that's too much, right? And how to actually build that feature incrementally. Why is it important? Because those are the things you actually already learned, or hopefully have started to learn. You know, you may not know a lot about Ruby, you may not know a lot about Rails, but what hopefully you're coming in with is the, okay, but I know how to like inquire. I know things like REPL. I know things like console log. I know not to write too many lines of code without testing them. I know that KV has told me that I should experience errors first and then try to fix that error and not go too far if I'm doing things the right way. And maybe I still have bad habits, just like everybody does, around jumping too many, trying to do too many things before refreshing the page. But it's still something I know I ought to be doing, and maybe I should be more diligent this week because I'm told it's overwhelming otherwise, right? How are we doing in terms of the features from yesterday? This week, I don't know if it's already been mentioned, but the content is more front-loaded. So it's less about like, oh, I got the stuff done for today, I'm going home. It's more like, for example, if you look into Friday, I think it's like empty, or Thursday even, right? Is that right? Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, if you look at Friday. So like basically it's more front-loaded, and the idea is that, here's all the work, go do it. So it's not so much about the day-to-day. So anyway, if you're feeling like, oh, I didn't get like everything done from yesterday, or at the end of today you're like, I didn't get everything done, well, you have some, don't worry about the schedule as much. But obviously, if there's an estimate on it, saying 3 hours, try not to spend 6 hours on it, right? How are you feeling in terms of the assignments from yesterday? People got everything done? Wow. Interesting. Calgary? I mean, that's not usually the answer I get, so that's exciting and great to hear. I like all the exercises from yesterday, which were, let me just bring them up. So in terms of features, there's what, 2 major features? And maybe we changed this without me remembering. And then today, there's more features. So I think today is more of that, like maybe unreasonably heavy for some of you or all of you, and so don't fret, right? Because I think if you look at the following day, right, like one. So you've already started looking at that one, or just kind of looked ahead to read it? Is that what you mean that it's? Still, for a given day, where there's no test or anything like that, that's still light, right? So there's a lot of buffer time left on Friday. Now, you may not already, maybe this was mentioned or not, but again, some more housekeeping. When you finish this project, hopefully on Friday or before, you'll submit it, right? And on Monday and Tuesday, you'll actually continue working on it. So on the left nav, when you're on the project view, you see more activities, and you're like, wait, why am I supposed to submit this when there's like tests to write? It's just, we're focusing on automated testing for 2 days of next week. Granted, those are close to your final project, and so you'll be hopefully not too distracted about your final project. It just made sense to do it in Ruby and Rails, because that's where your mind is right now. It's about automated testing. Out of curiosity, how many people went through the automated testing material in week 5, the stretch stuff in Friday, the unit testing stuff? You in the back? Remember your name? Benji? Who else? Just Benji? So one thing I would also say as part of housekeeping, because who knows how many more lectures I have with you, make sure that after you graduate, you look at our alumni book in Compass, which shows up in your schedule and on your top nav as like something that unlocks in week 10. And when you look at that, it's mostly a collection of stretched challenges and projects, whether it's from week 5 or even week 1 or prep course, that are going to be useful for you to keep on top of your coding habits and kind of keep your brain active from that perspective, because it's easy to focus too much on the job hunt or on something else. And it's about the balance, right? And so you want to make sure that you're spending, I don't know, 20, 30 hours a week, even after you graduate, at a minimum on this stuff, right? And so anyway, I digress. The unit testing stuff, if you haven't done it, would be in that thing, right? But maybe Benji will focus on something else because he's already done that one. Or maybe he'll revisit it or just understand that he could go further with unit testing and find other resources on that, right? All to say that don't freak out that there's more work to be done on Jungle even before you submit it, because those are unit testing and automated testing days. That's a really good question. By name again? Sylvia is asking, will we have access to Compass? You will have access. Yeah, you will have access to not only will you have access to your Compass with everything you've submitted, tech interviews, your feedback, and all of that stuff, lecture notes. It's not like you have a snapshot of it. You actually have the version that's live. So as it changes, let's say we archive an activity, it's going to go missing from your thing. But we won't be doing that very frequently. But it more likely we'll be adding and updating activities, and so you might have things that you haven't finished, right? So yes, you get access basically for as long as we are around. You will have access to that stuff. Yep. I see. Are you on a Linux machine or are you on a Mac? Just out of curiosity. It was too new for it, maybe? Yeah. Yeah. Generally, if you look in the gem file, I don't know if that's actually already in the project or if I added that locally, but you may in mature Rails or Ruby applications in general, you may find two files that have the Ruby version. One would be the gem file and or the Ruby version file, which is a dot file. And I think we don't have the Ruby version file, so we should probably add it. But I don't remember if it's in the gem file or not. But I will take note of that and log as an issue on the Jungle Rails repo because I have to confirm. But that's really good feedback. Hopefully you didn't spend hours trying to figure that out, and hopefully it was like. Okay, great. So what are we doing today? Is it fair to start talking about that? Any questions before we do? Any questions before we do? No. Okay, awesome. So what are we talking about? This is what I was thinking. Let's build a feature together in Rails, of course, talking about various things along the way. So what we'll use is we'll actually just use the default Jungle Rails app, since it gives us a little bit of skeleton to demo from, as opposed to starting a Rails app from scratch, which would be not as ideal in my opinion. And of course, we'll be looking at some topics. You always see me talking about the dev approach, so definitely the approach will be a big focus for when I engage you guys. It's like, okay, what do we do next and why? Debugging best practices are, of course, a big part of that. We'll be talking about some things in Rails, of course, and so we'll get into Rails. But be careful about too much. Just like with previous weeks, don't worry too much about a specific function and you're not sure how it works. Right? How does link 2 or form 4 actually work? Well, we can talk about it. But remember, the goal is not to learn those functions. It's not going to be that useful on the job, right? Whether it's a real job or not. So it's really about that approach. Here's the feature that we're going to work on. This is what I think. Tell me if you want to change it up a little bit, but this has worked in the past. We're going to add support for store-wide sales into the Jungle app. So an example would be like a back-to-school sale that the admin people, like with the admin access, will be able to create a store-wide sale starting on this date and ending on this date. Everything is 10% off or whatever. Right? So we want the admin to be able to manage that and kind of schedule upcoming sales, see the status of them and all of that. And then hopefully if we get enough time also on the public-facing side, it should affect the online experience for people coming to that e-commerce platform. Right? Everybody seems so excited about this. How are we feeling about that? It's okay? If I asked you to go ahead and build this right now, how many people here would be like, yeah, I kind of know how to approach this in terms of everything, the full stack? Yeah, some like this, that's good. Even if you're like, okay, we're doing a little bit of review from yesterday, again, A, that's good, and B, it's about, did you do it this way, or did you kind of do it slightly differently, right? So what I would suggest that we do is well, let me ask you, what should we start with? Because we have both the public-facing side that's going to be affected by sales, and then we have the back office admin side where people will be working to create these sales once the marketing team has decided what to offer, right? What should we start working on? The admin side, the public-facing side, something else, and feel free to be specific. There's no one right answer here. I just want to hear where your mind's at. Well, okay, there seems to be consensus on the front row here on admin. Work your way up to the front end is how you would say. I'm curious how you justify that, or if somebody else was saying the same thing. What would make you say it that way? What would make you say that?
If you have the admin, you can put information in the other list, and then you can query it and show it on the front end. Otherwise, you have to make up all the data, build the.
So is that true? Like, do I need to implement the full admin, which is Sebastian's point is, like, if I have the admin, then I can kind of test the main side a lot more easier, right? I'll have the database model and all of that stuff. But do you need the full admin side to be able to do the public side? You can tell from my tone that my answer is likely no. But like, you're probably thinking at least some work towards the admin, and then you can decide if you want to branch away onto the public side. Something like that? In my case, I'll go further into the admin side because I have certain things in my head that I want to use as examples, right? Oh, this is a good talking point, that sort of thing. So I agree, we can start with the admin side, and for that reason, I would do the same thing. Any other ideas, though? It's not like there's one right answer. That's just one approach. You want to secure the admin side, you're saying? Yeah. What do you mean by that? Like password sort of thing? Yeah, so right now I think that feature is missing because you implement that later on, right? So in this particular version, which is directly cloned from the original repo, that feature is not there. Is that going to be a problem that admins can access, anybody can access the admin area? Is that going to be a hindrance to me? Why? Why will it be a hindrance? Will it disallow me to implement admin sales, essentially? No, it's just that it's insecure. And so there's a missing feature or a bug where people can do that. But I'm just basically piling onto the available things that other people can access, which they shouldn't be able to, right? I'm not necessarily, once I fix that, I'll fix that all across the board, but that's not the goal of this lecture, right? Or this feature. Yeah, exactly. As Benji said, like you could actually still, what Sebastian was worried about doing, you could still do that. You know, it really depends on your team's approach. And let's say you did have a 2-person group here who's working on something like this for your final project. You could actually say, okay, well, one part of that group, let's say Sebastian and I are paired up. I would say, Sebastian, why don't you start mocking up the front end and how it's going to look? Don't worry about the if statement on the sale. Just pretend there's a sale and just work on that while I work on some of the database modeling, and then eventually we'll glue it together. So it's not like you're blocked by one side or the other. And this is a common strategy that companies use in order to get more momentum on features, right? Any other thoughts before we start, rubber meets the road thing? How's Calgary doing? Good, good. Okay, that's great. Can I ask before I start, you have a laptop. Are you on the Calgary Slack by any chance? Can you join that for me? Because I have my phone, but it keeps dying after 10 minutes. The screen keeps turning off. In case they have questions or something, you can be a proxy. Or if they want to jump in with answers. And hopefully, Calgary, you heard that, and that'll encourage you to do that. OK, so where to start? We've already decided at the macro level where to start. Where to start at the micro level? Maybe add the menu in the nav bar, Sebastian says. So here I am, my Jungle app. And we have this admin area. And right now it has dashboard and products. And I think you guys have added categories. Is that right? We want to add another thing probably like store-wide sales or sales in general, just sales maybe we'll call it. Remember, these are not coupon codes or discounts that are product specific, right? These are just store-wide sale. It's going to be it's much simpler. That's the reason I picked it, right, for this lecture. So again, no right answer. So okay, right here, we can start there. Any other suggestions? Make a feature branch. Ooh, I like what you're thinking. Yeah, did I already do that? Nice. So I guess I already had that going. Literally have not worked on this project since the last lecture. So I agree with that. Yes, first thing, good answer. Feature branch. What else? Any other suggestions? There's 2 good answers so far. Come on. I could think about the model. I could start with that Rails generate model, which we'll get to, of course. That could be my first step. Remember my mantra, though, which is you want to ideally see a problem. Like you want to work incrementally, which means you want to create a problem, which is like the first problem that you should encounter. And you should see an error message, ideally, like an actual error message, hopefully. Not always the case, but you want to try for that. And then you want to make that error message go away, not implement the whole feature right there, right? So what can generate, like right now the nav is missing. That's not really an error. It's a gap, and so that's good, but it's not great. That is a good point, but I have to write code that then generates that error. So you're right, it is good. I'm not saying it, I'm not poo-pooing it, but I'm saying, is there something I can do to like say, this is what should work and is not working right now? Yep, so you're saying make the routes for the pages, and when you go there, there'll be an error. Absolutely. Exactly. Basically what Sebastian said, which is like when you click the link, which will take my browser and make a GET request to hopefully admin sales or something, there'll be an error. So I don't even need the nav item to create that error. I can actually just do admin sales. I have an error. And this should work, right? And now I'm going to make the error go away slowly and surely. So first error, and by the way, you should ideally have an assumption before you even go there, because that way you're testing your mental model on whether you have it or not, or where your gaps are, right? So let's say my assumption was correct. I was going to get a 404 error with a debug message saying I can't find that route. What's my next step to make this error go away? You guys are sharp. How did you know? Was this the dead giveaway right there? So yeah, make the route. We know that in Rails, the routes are separated. They're decoupled from the implementation of the routes. Agreed? So I expect to find them in a file. Do you remember the name of the file? Config is the folder, and routes is the file. Okay, cool. So what am I doing? Am I clicking on config and going to routes? No. Hopefully in week 7 right now, even though you're new to this whole crazy structure, and hopefully you have this whole project open with the left side tree, right? You're not implementing one file at a time and having multiple windows open here. I do not want to see you do this. I don't want you to navigate to routes by clicking on the left side. I mean, I'm going to have a lot of digressions, and this is one of them. I want you to know, if you know the name of the file, why aren't you doing that? Well, no, it's all the same shortcut, actually. Not only is it the same feature, it's the same shortcut. So Command P, whether it's Atom, Sublime, or VS Code, any of the major modern editors. Well, Command T is the Sublime one, but it's alias to Command P as well. I want you to start using, if you haven't already with Chatty App, with larger projects, if you know the name of the file or even some letters in the file. For example, I don't remember the name of the file, but it's like config, and then I think it has to do with routes. And like there's fuzzy search here. I want you to use that. Because let's say if I'm mentoring you and I see you doing the other thing, the first thing I'll point out, no matter what your trouble is, hey, how come you're doing it this way? I want to see you start doing more of those like lazy dev hacks to get around faster, to be more productive, right?
We have multiple, like for example, we have multiple indexes. How would the work so all can do the same thing?
Yes. So let's say you did search for index. You've got multiple index files, and in many projects you'll have like 20. But let's say I know like it's products index. Oh, that doesn't help because there's admin products index and there's products index. But I want to access admin product index. Right? Like, I already, my force of habit, without even thinking about it, I'm going like this. Like, I don't care where the spaces are, it's fuzzy search, right? So I really want to see you guys use this because you know how I tech interview people, devs? I sit with them and I pair program and I look at how they use their tools and of course how they solve problems. I don't care how much Rails they know, right? Let's say if it's for a Rails gig. I'm sorry, say that again? In VS Code as an integrated terminal, I hate the integrated terminal. So, I mean, personally, my opinion is don't use it. Use terminal. But VS Code has a lot of momentum, and a lot of people like the terminal, and apparently there's benefits. I just haven't really found the need. Sure, no, but I mean, like, why aren't you just running iTerm and Z shell in your terminal? And why aren't you just command tabbing to it and having that bigger screen real? Like, why is half my real estate terminal? That like bothers me when I see it, but that's a personal opinion. There's a difference between like, you know, obviously there's a certain flavor of opinion in my what I'm saying here, but in this one, it's a strong opinion that I feel like everybody should be doing if you're using one of those 3 editors. Like, clearly we can agree that doing this to open a file is slower. Terminal, it's more like weaker opinion, like it's a personal opinion versus like something I can actually justify. So I'll leave that one, right? And you should separate those two. When you hear a senior developer telling you something, is this like very specific to them and just their personal quirks, or is this like something that will actually be valuable for all developers, right? Lots of digressions from KV. How are we doing so far? Okay. So Command P, no matter which of those 3 editors, of course Vim will be different, and don't ask me about Vim, you can ask Don. So we said we have an error. We're going to talk about the routes. So here we are at the routes. And we want to add a route to the admin area. And so as you've done yesterday with categories, what are we going to do? We're going to add routes within this namespace. Now, the word namespace is very generalized, right? We have namespaces. What does namespace mean? A name where you can put things inside of that name? Is that what you're saying? It's generally accurate. Any other definitions that are maybe said differently, just out of curiosity? A collection of things that belong to a certain name? Yeah, a collection of names that belong to a certain name. You can think of it as a prefix, right? So like /admin is the namespace here. A directory, what somebody said, is a namespace in a way. I guess it's just another logical namespace. I'm putting files that have to do with marketing in a folder called marketing. You know, like that's my namespace. So it's a very general abstract term, and it's kind of unfortunate that it was used, maybe, depending on your opinion, because it's like, well, like, more specifically, we should be saying like route namespace, but I guess it's like, well, you're in the routes file, so it's a route namespace, right? Can you recommend any Mac extensions to help with productivity? The one I do swear by is a screen manager, specifically. Again, another digression, I apologize. So that I can quickly do things like, oh yeah, this is going to go left and that's going to go right. Or actually, I want it to be full screen. And no, I don't like dragging and snapping Windows 10 style. Again, that takes more energy and switching from the keyboard to the mouse. I want to stick to the keyboard as much as possible, right? So a general abstract rule as being more productive is anytime you are switching from your keyboard to a cursor, ask yourself, can I in the future do less of that? And even now I have, sorry?
What's the shortcut?
So the shortcuts aren't important. Sorry, the tool, I didn't finish talking about it, is called, there's multiple tools. This one is called Size Up. It's called Size Up. There are other ones as well. This one is like, it's free, but it's freemium, I think, so you have to pay for like lifetime use, lifetime license. Otherwise, it keeps doing pop-ups and stuff. Just like Sublime. I have yet to pay for Sublime. And essentially, you can customize those shortcuts. So when I switch up, like when I set up another monitor, I can quickly move this window to that monitor. I'm not dragging it over and double-clicking it. Like, that's crazy talk, all right? So like I'll use this shortcut to go previous monitor to next monitor, for example. Cool, so is that okay? Anyway, let's come back to the routes. Good question from Calgary, thank you. What's the thing I'm going to put in here? So I want to put in sales. Can I do you guys have come across this? What is this? This get sales index. What is it saying? Yeah, like handle the route get sales. Now this is automatically prefixed with admin because we're in that block. And remember, we're in Ruby. This is the other thing I'm going to try and focus on in this lecture. This is very easy. And I also, when I started learning Rails, I learned Rails and Ruby at the same time, kind of similar to you. But I didn't have somebody telling me, remember, there's a difference. And I was like, I didn't know what was Rails and where Ruby began and ended and where Rails started and ended. And it's still hard for you, I'm sure. But always ask yourself, what's happening from a Ruby perspective? So before we even talk about what's happening from a Rails perspective, somebody tell me what's happening in terms of Ruby code here. Don't talk about routes. Don't talk about anything like that. Talk about Ruby and code. So tell me what's happening from a Ruby perspective when I write that line. Mm-hmm. Sebastian is saying that is a method call. What method am I calling? Get. This seems to be the things that are being passed in to get, right? How many, of course it's a function call, therefore arguments are being passed in. Method, function, similar, right? So what is the number of arguments here? 1. And what is that argument type? A fat arrow. It's not a callback. It's not an arrow function. It is a hash, as Ruby folks call it, or a map. Right? Not exactly an object in Ruby. I mean, it is a type of object, but in JavaScript we're a little bit more loose with that term, right? And what that means. So we're passing in a hash. We're just being Rubyists and writing idiomatic Ruby, and we're told that it's better to confuse people without those things in there. Right? So some people love that, some people hate it, whatever. That's the weak opinion thing, where it's just your personal flavor, right? Versus anything tangible. Okay, so this is telling the routing dispatcher, please register a new route. And anytime somebody goes to sales, this is the key that you should care about. And what is this side saying from a Rails perspective, the right side? Controller and action, nothing to do with the view, actually. So the controller is the sales controller. And this is just the Rails syntax for separating the controller from the action. And so we want to go to the index action. So what do I expect to happen with this? Not that this is the most optimal code to write, but what do I expect to happen now with my error? No controller, because it's going to find the route, and now it's going to be trying to go to the sales controller and failing to try to find the sales controller because we have yet to create that. Really good guess or knowledge there. Thank you. So we have admin, sales controller as the missing controller, right? Now before we actually go solve that, we might say, let's actually refactor this a little bit because I've solved the error, but I don't know if I like how I've solved it. So any other ideas around the routes? Could I be doing something different? What about, sorry? Yeah, writing like the one above. And I would argue that you should also add, instead of unlocking all of the resource actions, which is what would be by default, I would argue that you don't expose them all. So you say, I only right now want the index, similar to what we did here. Do we agree that these two cause the exact same effect to our routing table? Our dispatcher will behave the same way and have the same kind of information and insight? If you're not sure, you can verify this, right? How would you verify that? You would take a look at the routes, which are shown, I believe, if they're actually shown right here. This is your routing table, right? And another way is bin rake routes, as you have probably seen. And so you can see, like, and I'm just going to grep because, Again, lazy, I don't want to scan everything. I just care about that line that has sales in it, right? Again, these are the things I want to see you be using to optimize your life and make your life easier. So yeah, I can see admin sales. There's a get, and it goes to admin sales index. And that's just with this line here. If I comment that line out and use resources, I expect to see the same thing. Literally the same thing. So why is it that there's two ways of doing that? Any guesses? Both of those lines are doing the same thing. Of course, the code that's executed to do them may be different behind the scenes, different methods. But the ultimate result that we care about seems like there's not even a character of difference. Not even one of those columns in that table is different.
The arrow one.
That's a good guess. That's one reason, actually, that one still exists. And in fact, in Rails 1, when I started Rails in 2007, sorry. That was a brain fart. It was just this. There was no, RESTful was not a popular thing yet, RESTful routes and all of that. And so the idea of RESTful resources was not a thing. And so we just had like whatever routes we felt like creating. There was no like ideal convention still. There was still kind of a convention, but like it wasn't really well enforced by Rails. And so instead of this, if you wanted to have a CRUD of Rails, a CRUD of sales, you would have to like register each of those. Like you'd have to do this. And as you can imagine, we looked at a whole bunch of projects a year later. You know, the Rails devs looked at it and go, oh man, there's a lot of like stuff we could dry up here. There's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of like a pattern that we see that should just be a method. Right? We'll call that method resources, and it will infer those routes because you know it's convention anyway. Right? Rails is about convention over configuration anyway. So let's kind of nudge people more towards those kind of conventions by giving them more helpers, more of those functions that will do that, all those lines in one line. Right? The other reason, by the way, is sometimes you don't want it to be a resource. You know, you could argue that maybe your home page is not a resource, at least not a RESTful resource, and it's not going to have a CRUD. And so maybe for the home page, you really just want to do like get / goes to home index. Okay, that's fair. And maybe really you want to call that root. Just because like that's the home page, that's the root of that namespace. And so these kind of emerged later on in Rails 2, Rails 3 versus earlier on. Yeah, I mean, they just arbitrarily decided to use hash there for separating controller action. And I think the motivation was because Ruby's documentation also in terms of object method is object pound method or class pound method. And so it's just like Ruby convention. Yeah. In the new way, what it's really doing is there's just a method that will just call a bunch of these behind for us. It will do like delete, sales, goes to destroy, and so on. And of course, the first keyword there, the method name that we're calling, is the verb that we're registering, that part of that table, that routing table. So we're saying, you know, just like app.get in Express, which says only care about GET requests that match this path, or app.post, only care about a POST request that matches this. We're doing the same thing here. It's our app.get, sales, and that's our callback function. I see what you're saying. So here, how does it know that? It's the built-in convention. So if you look at the documentation for resources, it's like, I will create an index that's a get. I will create a slash that's with an ID. So it's /sales/ID for the show, which will have a get, but also a delete for the destroy, or a put for the update for that ID. And so there's a specific convention in terms of these are the names, and this is the verbs. Because those two things make a request, right? The path and the verb. So we agree that the kind of conventional way, because we know we're going to want to CRUD this, is this approach, which is more modern, right? Rails 2.3 onwards, I believe it was. 2.3 onwards. Still with me? Am I going too slow? Or is this good review? Sorry?
Can you remove the comma only in the
Yeah, that's a good point. Like just to demonstrate, Sebastian is suggesting, what happens when we do this? I want to see all the sales routes. And now I see that, and this is what I want you to be doing. Like, oh, the tutorial told me to just do only. What happens if I don't do that? Oh, it didn't tell me to try that, but I should try that. So I better understand what's going on. Or maybe that will lead me to say, okay, let's put that tutorial on hold for a second. I'm going to go understand resources a little bit more and read documentation on it. Right?
So those are like the verbs.
Here's your verbs. So it created a post for sales because you don't need the ID to create something. You're not going to have the ID. You're creating something. But when you're trying to update something with a patch or a put, you're going to want its ID because you're trying to update a resource. Right? So the ID is required. It's part of the path. It's not optional. Right? And you might be wondering, why are there two, like, the two that go to the update, where everything else has only one? And this is, again, backwards compatibility. They realized they should have done it as patch. And then they're like, oh, I guess we have to support put, because like, we don't want to break applications that upgrade to this version of Rails. And so put is acceptable as well. And I'm not going to get into put versus patch. You can go study that if you like. But again, another thing that you might want to like eyebrow raiser, and you go research that, right? So far, so good? So we have our route, and we have a failed, we have an error on the controller. So what am I going to do next? I want to make that error go away so I could create a file with that class in it. Because the error is uninitialized constant admin sales controller. Right? So I need that constant. So I could just touch a file and add that in myself, but we don't want to remember boilerplate code because that's just unnecessary cognitive load. And so we just have generators that we have to remember instead that will help us replace that code. So in this case, we're going to generate a controller called admin sales, right? Now I could go ahead and give it that actions as well, but I prefer that I don't do that. I find that part of the generator is kind of weak. And we have the admin sales controller. And if we open up that file, how am I going to open it? Command P, admin sales controller. Right? There's the file. And there it is. The constant is defined. Now here's something you may or may not know. It said constant, not class. Does anybody know why? It didn't say uninitialized class. It said uninitialized constant. So like if I open up IRB and I say math, that works, right? What is math? A constant, says Sebastian. It's not going to change. A constant is apparently something that doesn't change, as we've learned from even JavaScript, right? Although JavaScript is slightly different use of it. Is it like that? I don't actually know. Oh, yeah. And so we have this constant within a constant here. We're getting into namespaces. I don't want to go into that yet. But if I just do like this, right? The error, it seems like I'm looking for a class named Kurum or a module named Kurum. But it will say uninitialized constant Kurum. So in Ruby, the idea is that, yeah, that could be a class or a module. But you're going to define it with a capitalized letter, starting with a capitalized letter. Anything in Ruby that starts with a capitalized letter is a constant. So really you have yes, it's a class, but there's a constant that refers to the class. Right? The name is a constant. Does that make sense? Sorry? Nice. That's good. That's a good review then, right? Okay, so we have our admin sales controller. What do we expect to happen with the error when I refresh? There will be nothing, there's no action. So maybe the error will be something about a missing action or a missing method or something, because the controller is empty right now, and we're trying to get it to a sales index, right? It's a good guess. And indeed, that's the next error that we have. So now we're going to solve that error, and only that error. Action index could not be found. If at this point you're doing this, and you're actually writing code in here, I'd argue you're doing it slightly wrong, and you should just be solving that error. So this is me. There's that action. I'm told that's how I implement an action, which is really just a method on that class. What type of method is this, by the way? Is it a public, private, instance, class? What does that tell you? It's a public instance method. What does that tell you? How is this method used? Like, if I just open up console, Rails console right now, okay, so as a digression, but an important one. Rails is kind of does a little bit of magic behind the scenes and does a whole bunch of auto loading of files that are already in certain folders. So app controllers, app views, app models automatically gets required, because normally if you're just running a Ruby app, you have to require the file. I didn't have to run a bunch of requires, and therefore this constant that points to this controller class is already there. It's auto required, right? Because it was in the right folder. Can I therefore just do dot index? Yeah, this is how you call a class method, because I'm calling it directly on the class. It will say, I can't find that method, even though the method is there. It's just a public instance method, not a public class method. So what does that tell you about how Rails will use the controller, if that's how you define actions, as a public instance method? Exactly. It must have to create an instance of that class in order to actually use that action. So somewhere you should be envisioning Rails as having to do a .new, or sorry, new, yeah, a .new on the controller. Right? It's doing a .new, you know, in maybe different lines of code, but .new .index. Oh, I haven't hit save, right. At what point is it making you instances? Do you have to worry about it? These are the things that, like, it's good to have that insight that that's how it's working, because I didn't have that insight when I started with Rails. It just was magic to me, right? And this is when people say, Rails is magic. Well, magic is really just that you don't understand all the things that it's doing. And so there's a certain amount of magic you want to unravel, and there's a certain amount you're comfortable with, right? It's how much you're uncomfortable versus comfortable, and everybody has a different kind of barometer or you know, tendency to want to unravel a certain amount of magic, right? You could get away with not understanding this at all and still be okay as a junior Rails dev. But starting to ask these questions, you start to understand a little bit more about how the framework works behind the scenes. I didn't answer your question directly because that's not the important part. The important part is this stuff, right? You could, if you're really curious about the framework, you could actually go look through the source code, right? But that's going to be a rabbit hole for at least at this stage in your career. So far, so good? You know what? I will try. Sebastian's asking, is there a good documentation area for source code of Rails? I'll try and actually answer that question through showing you. So if I don't answer it by the end of the class, then bring it up again, because I'll forget otherwise. Any other questions before we go forward? Any other questions? Any other thoughts? No? So what do I expect to happen now when I hit refresh? It's now going to find the action, so the action error should go away, and as you're saying, the view is not going to be there, the template file specifically. And so it will complain that there is no index.html.erb or something like that, right? And so now we're going to say, okay, well, missing template, that seems like admin sales index. And it's trying to use other kind of filters to find this file, right? It's trying to find things that match HTML format and ideally ERB, but it's okay with some other formats as well, which you're not sure what they are, but it doesn't matter. So let's go ahead and create. Again, I want to see you use tab completion. I don't want to see, oh yeah, what's the name of that thing? Admin. This is a great way to validate whether you got the right typing and if you have a typo in there or not, right? So we've created the file. It's an empty file. And now it should be able to find that file if I put it in the right place. And when I hit refresh, what do I expect to happen? It's an empty file, so empty page, right? Very close. Empty page. Except it seems like I'm getting the nav, the top nav, which is coming from? Right. Now, one of the things that I bet you're not doing enough of right now as a debugging tactic I'll talk about right now, and I see this as a common mistake amongst junior Rails devs, or junior devs in general, actually. And this is partly because, like, in Node, we don't really do a very good job of this part, which is leveraging the server logs. If you're like, how is this app working? What are the different controllers? Well, what is the controller, the action? What templates are getting rendered? How did it go? What other things, what partials got rendered? A great thing to look at is, I'm just going to clear it and refresh and look at it again. This is so useful. And I wish Node was this verbose. So maybe there's a Node module that, for Express that does this. Morgan is not that great, in my opinion, for dev logging, like debugging logging, because this is very, very verbose, right? How did I log that? I was on Rails server. I cleared it just to show that there's nothing right now. I can't even scroll up, Command K. And I refresh the page. Every request coming in that's hitting the Rails framework is getting routed, is getting logged. I'm going to leave this up for a second. I want you to read the whole thing. Of course, if you're clever, you will scan certain things and ignore other things that you feel important or less important, right? So go ahead and scan that.
Notice that Rails, the load of the page is slower than usual. Something use on the web and website?
So different question. So we'll answer that question, but hopefully in the meantime you're looking at this. The question is Rails, it feels slower on my machine. Is it actually being used in the wild? Does anybody know which companies use Rails? Although I would argue some of them are slow. So maybe not the best example. GitHub and GitLab, which is the open source competitor, which is picking up a lot of steam these days and has been for a few years. GitLab is an open source Rails project. Shopify is their main web app, is a Rails app as well. Very big, billion-dollar company. Sorry? And Canadian, and they're based out of Ottawa and Toronto and other places. They started out of Ottawa. I remember when they presented a Shopify at a conference and they were using Rails for it, and I was like, oh, cool, you have skateboard stores, or snowboarding equipment or whatever it was at the time. Yeah, I remember going to the conference where they launched it. GitHub also, they launched at the same conference.
You're just in the same thing. Like they say they are reaching 80,000 requests a second.
Shopify is reaching 80,000 requests a second. Wow. I didn't know that. That's pretty crazy, but not surprising.
So that's right. So like to answer your question, that's big.
Yeah. Now, on a slow side, I would argue Airbnb, which is also built with Rails, their front end, their web app, is quite slow. Like I find it like, why is it so slow? So, yes, Ruby is a slower language. Like the virtual machine is not as optimized as like the amount of research and money that goes into the JavaScript virtual machine, the Node, well, the V8, or other virtual machines that power Node, for example, are faster. So there's a little bit less momentum there. So the language is slower. And Rails itself is a behemoth. So they have to, Shopify to get those kind of requests has to do a lot of caching and other tricks to deal with it. And they have more servers. Maybe if they were using Erlang and Elixir, they would have like half or 1/3 of the servers that they need. So yes, there's definitely a trade-off in terms of performance and ease of use or community or ecosystem, all that stuff, right? Ultimately, the way a CTO makes a decision isn't just performance. It's What's going to get me the most productivity is probably one of the first questions. What's going to be the most maintainable code is maybe one of the top questions. And then maybe if you're building a high performance trading algorithm, then actually performance is the first question you're asking. It really depends on the app, right? Great question, because it's a can of worms, right? You can go, there's a lot of opinions there, and you can go really far, but not really what I want to focus on too much in this lecture, but hopefully that's a good tip of the iceberg answer. Am I talking too fast again? Are we okay? All right. This coffee is obviously, I haven't had breakfast, and this coffee is getting to me. So here we are. Speaking of it, break time? Right? Let's do break time. We're probably going to go till 11, but hopefully you're okay with that. Let's re-adjourn in 7 minutes at 10:10. Okay? Okay, let's resume. It's already past when I said we would resume. All right. Resuming. We're at the point where we have the admin sales empty page. We have the index action. And we have an empty template. And to bring that up, it is admin sales index HTML. Also, if you want to go this way, fine. Not what I would recommend. My God, that took a long time. So here we are. And of course, I want to just quickly add something to this file because I want to see that I'm on the right file and all that. Of course, I'm feeling confident that it is. So that's looking good. What's next? I want to move a little bit faster so we get to the meaty part. If we're going to make it look, let's say we're going to be lazy and we're going to make it look cruddy just like products looks cruddy. Not cruddy as a bad thing, but cruddy as in, create, read, update, delete. Let's, without the update, I guess, let's kind of copy some of this stuff. Right? So this is me kind of using the advantage of having existing code base and not having to start everything from scratch. So leverage the fact that there's existing code around you. That is another tip. So admin products index, is that right? I'm going to copy that blindly because I want exactly the same thing except instead of products, I want it to be sales. Just edited all the words that say products to sales. There, done. Right? Did I miss something? Oh yeah, you got the lowercase product because I did the plural only. Good catch. And of course, if you want to be really, just make sure there's no product, nothing. Oh, there's a couple of things you should be using in your editor. I showed you Command P. Can anybody guess the other major feature in any editor you're in you should be using when you're in a project? Command Shift F. Let's say you're working on a project and you're like, this is my first time seeing this page, or I've been working on this project, but I haven't come to this page and I have to fix a bug on this page. You want to find out where this page is rendered, how this page is actually shown. What are your options? The log is a really good option. We didn't finish talking about it because we said we were going to look at it and we forgot. So let me refresh and take a look. This is admin products index. Look at all the details that are in here. Now I'm going to ignore the colorful stuff in the middle because it seems like SQL queries. Maybe I care less about those, or maybe I do, depends, right? But I'm going to look at, there was a GET request for admin products. And look at where it went. It went to this controller, this action, HTML type. And in order to make it work and display the contents, we rendered underscore product as part of index within the application layout. This is how long it took, I don't care. And also, the top nav was rendered as well as a partial. And we sent back 200 and spent this much time in the views and this much time in active record. It's pretty useful information. That's to trace on everything that was. Now I know, oh, there's a product partial that I need to edit. If I need to edit those rows, most likely. Yeah.
The server log save it on the local disk?
The server logs are saved on local disk, yes. Yeah. But that is a question you can look and research. That's what I want you to be asking yourself and then answering through Google. But it's a fair question still. Okay, so we copied it. And so this is what it looks like right now. What do I expect will happen when I use this? This is not incremental, or at least not in the same way. I took a bunch of code and I wrote it all together. Take a shortcut. What do I expect will happen at this point, based on what the code I've written? HTML is going to be fine, right? Like whatever HTML you write. We don't care about the styling right now. I don't have a sales model or table. We haven't generated it or migrated it. But it's rendering the view right now, right? This is where we know this was working. Will this continue working or will it fail? And if you feel it's going to fail, which line will it fail on? I mean, it's not going to be the HTML lines. Those are not dynamic. So there's only like, what, two lines of Ruby code in here? Are those going to work? There's the link to and the render. It is going to fail. You're probably right. Which line? 8 or 24. We have 8. We have 24. Any more takers? 8. 24. So you're like, yeah, it's a link to, right? Like, what could possibly go wrong with link to? Which would be my guess as well if I didn't know how link to works. And in this case, the people that guessed 8 are correct. That 8 will fail. But do they know why 8 will fail? So somebody other than Sebastian, because he's been answering a lot. So he's muted for the next little while. You won't be able to find the sale. What are you worried about the table or the model? View helpers don't care. Well, they may. We'll talk about the link to a little bit. Use this excuse to talk about it. But what is the role of the link to? What is the role of the link to? Let me ask again. Creates an A tag, an anchor tag with a link in it, right? Exactly. So really, ultimately, I just want a href equals admin sales new. Is that right? Whatever. I don't have to have the exact same contents in there, right? That's what I want. And so let's refresh and confirm that line 8 is failing. The reason it will fail, it's taking in the right amount of arguments. We copied all of it and all that. The class is fine. It's just HTML class, CSS class. I would argue that this will fail because this is just a string, right? That's not going to fail. This is going to fail. What is this? This is the route that it's trying to get to. This is the href. So let's take a look. It did not complain because we're on the wrong page. Admin sales. It was line 24 there. Oh, you know why it did? Because we didn't have this only. We commented out the only. I thought we hadn't commented that out. So we're still right, okay? It's just, it's embarrassing. Everybody's right, everybody's right. So line 8 is failing because it's trying to actually confirm that that route exists. That is the reason that we are using the array, is to say, make sure that route exists as well before you render this A tag. Because a link to really just is a helper to generate an A tag. So really, I could just call a link to this way. Instead of this, I can just say link to. What is this part? This is just the href. That will work. Now that error will go away. Again, I'm on the wrong page. Wrong partial. I don't know why I'm doing that. Clearly, haste is waste. I'm on this one here, right? New sale. And I'm going to just replace that with a string, and I'll find that that works just fine. Now, we can't see it because the next line will fail as well. So what we'll do is, we're working incrementally. I don't need to see that line work, right? Boom. So we've got that button working now, but it's going to Google. The whole point of that was to show that link to can handle a string, that's fine, and this second argument could be a string, but really we're saying, I'd like you to use the internal dispatch routing table to make sure that that route exists. And I want to use the Ruby or Rails idiomatic way to generate that route. It may seem like overkill, but it's doing a little bit of validation for us as well. It's forcing us to make sure that the internal route is good. Right?
Does the order matter?
Well, that's a question for the docs. Does the order matter? So I would look at the docs. The answer is yes, but not as important of a question, I would argue. So far, so good? Now, the older or still valid way of doing this is new admin sale path. So really, the array is just those words broken up into array elements. New, I think it was new admin sale? Yeah, new admin sale path. Path is always going to be there. So they're like, why don't we do it this way? Right? Both are allowed, and it's not like one is there to replace the other. This is a method call. Right? It generates this method. In fact, if you see with the array, if I keep the array and I refresh, the error look what it's doing. It's actually using that array to generate a method name. It may be like, what the hell? I'm like, this error doesn't help me at all. I'm not calling that method. But if you understand the inner workings of what's happening, now that error makes sense. Right? So this is what I was saying, like, it's good to understand the framework from at least a little bit of depth. The error messages start making more sense, for example. Because if you looked at this before, you'd be like, undefined method, I'm not calling that method anywhere. Okay, but it's this line. I guess this thing is making that method call. Or like link2 is making that method call. How do I confirm that? Let's take a look at the stack trace. I call it on line 8 in index. And then it goes into URL helper, line 181, link2. You know what? Maybe I want to take a look at that. How do I take a look at that? There's a couple of ways. Like I can actually like, depending on the framework that I'm using, sometimes you can actually like look at the source code right through the error message. Or in this case, I'll just basically, let me use another hack, which I really shouldn't even be showing you. Will it actually work in this case? I don't know. Let's see. Sorry, bundle show. Action view. Yeah, so here's my gem. I'm just going to open that up. Here's the code. What's the file? URL helper line 181. I always forget the go to line shortcut. See, I'm not perfect either on this stuff. So it initially went into link2, right? And then link2, we can see what options it takes. That answers your question, hopefully. And you can see the documentation for it as well that gets rendered in the docs. This is what the documentation is generated by, all of these comments. And it went into this line, 181. That's the stack trace. And then from there, it went into line 100 because it called URL 4. And I can keep going. I can trace that error if I really want to. And now, this is the beauty of open source. I'm able to look at, if I don't fully understand what's happening, I can open up that source code and if I'm really curious, go through it. And I've done this a few times, but I'm careful not to be unproductive as a result, right? Is this helpful? Okay. Don't go too far into this rabbit hole, though. So, lots of talking points. Let's come back to what we were doing. Not on this editor, but on this one. And we understand that this needs to be a route that exists, so we're going to go into our routes to make that error go away. We're going to enable new as another thing because we need that page now. We need that action to exist. And that should hopefully make that error go away because that route now exists, which made that method exist. Which is crazy. Enabling the route makes a method available. We didn't define that method. So I guess that through inference, I can say that when the routing table creates methods that I can use, right? I didn't have to really read documentation. I can kind of infer that from what I'm seeing in terms of the errors. Have I lost you guys? Are you guys with me still? Lost you guys? So the error has to do with a missing method, right? Undefined method. You would think that the solution there is to define a method. That would be your first gut reaction, which wouldn't be a bad reaction, except in a framework, like a magical framework like Rails, maybe it's creating those methods dynamically. And in this case, I did not define the method to make the error go away. I just defined a new route. But that defines a method that I can use. And in fact, what's even more confusing is I'm not even using that method. I'm indirectly calling that method through an array, like WTF. Right? It's really new admin sale path that's being called here, as we see from this error, new admin sale path. So there are like more and more levels of abstraction, depending on what version of Rails you're using especially, that you have to kind of understand at least a little bit. You don't have to read the whole code. And you could do that through reading the error messages a little bit more. Why is there a method missing? Instead of just like, oh, I kind of understand this error. I have to do this according to the tutorial. But why is the error saying what it's saying? Why is it saying uninitialized constant? Why isn't it saying uninitialized class? Why is it saying undefined method when I didn't call the method? Oh, it must be calling the method. And the stack trace shows me that. Things like that is what I'm trying to sort of encourage you to do when you're reading those error messages or reading whatever it is you're reading to learn this stuff. You asked about tricks to learn new languages. This is what I'm trying to focus on here versus the feature itself, right? Is this helpful? Okay, let's move on because we want to actually get further along with the feature as well. So there's more talking points. So I'm going to go a little bit faster here. So we have our render sales, which is going to fail next. Why is that failing? There is no at sales. Instance variables in Ruby are by default nil. And I can validate that if I forget. Any kind of instance variable does not throw an error. A local variable call does. But if I had an at in front of it, it's all good. It's nil by default. Just the Ruby philosophy. And so therefore, this is defaulting to nil. So I'm essentially doing render nil, which is why it's leading to this error here. It's an obscure error. What the hell are you talking about? I have to implement 2 partial paths? No, you don't. Just make it not nil, right? So here, render is another can of worms. Like, it's gone through a lot of evolution. The way render works now is you can give it a collection of these active model or active record instances, and it's smart enough to go find the partial, which is kind of crazy. Let me show you kind of the old school way of doing a render. What you would do is, I want to loop through all my sales and then render them. So you would do sales.each, do sale. Render. It would actually be rendered. The oldest syntax was like this. This was the old way of doing it, Rails 1, when I started on this stuff. Oh, thank you. And this will, I believe, still work once we have the partial and everything in place. Because, backwards compatibility, like you pointed out, right? Backwards compatibility. We still want to support that stuff for old code bases. And, it's a lot more verbose, but it gives you a lot more control on where your partial is, what locals you're passing in. This doesn't give you, it's a lot more easy to write, but it's a lot less flexible, right? Arguably. But this is what, if this became a common thing. It's like, oh, we're constantly doing this. It's very verbose. And it's always the same location because we're following convention. So why don't we just turn this part, and so this was the next evolution. Why do we have to say partial? Like, it'll find out if it's a partial or not. So we'll just do this. Why do we have to say locals? Why don't we just pass that in as the next argument? So it became this. This is also valid. This is valid render call. And then it's like, well, this is kind of, why don't we just leave it as render cell? And it will be smart enough to look in its folder first before, and so you don't have to specify the whole path. Let's cut those characters out, because that's implied. And then it became that. And then it's like, well, there's still that loop, which makes sense if you want to have full control, because you might want to do other things in that loop. But what if you don't? What if it's exactly this? Why don't you just do that? You see how it evolved over from Rails 1 all the way to Rails 4/5? This is also important. One of the analogies I like to make is joining and starting with Rails right now is analogous to me like starting Game of Thrones with season 5. As an example, it could be another show that you like. Because you're like, there's all these characters and there's all this depth. But I don't know why the characters are behaving the way they're behaving. Right? There's all this history behind them. Of course, there's the initial version, which was probably, you still had to get to know the characters a little bit, right? The first season. But then as it progresses, it evolves, right? Some characters die off, others don't. It's a pretty good analogy, right? Characters dying off. And so it is a little bit uncomfortable, extra jarring, because you're joining a framework that's a little bit more mature, right? Of course, you have other types of concerns when you're joining a framework that's not mature. The documentation might not be as far along. There might be more bugs. There's less of Stack Overflow activity, right? There's trade-offs there. Was this evolution thing helpful in just kind of relating to this a little bit more? Anyway, let's move on, and we're going to do it I'm going to keep this commented in, and I'll include it in my notes, but this is what we're using. This is also quite valid and found quite often. Okay, so don't think that this is slightly less idiomatic, but that's arguable. Like, it's not really that much more verbose. So render sales. And sales is nil, so we got to solve that error. What do we do? We could do it here, right? If we're not being MVC. This is likely the code that I want. I want all the sales. Maybe I want to paginate it and stuff in the future. But for now, let's just do all the sales. Work incrementally. This is valid, but not idiomatic. Why is it not idiomatic? What does idiomatic mean? It's not following the idioms of Rails, right? Or Ruby. In this case, it's not Rails idiomatic, because Rails tells us to use MVC, which means model view controller, MVC, model view controller. Not in that order. Right? Because when a request comes in, it doesn't go into the model first. And that's actually a good thing to talk about as well. what is the life cycle of a request? Is this something you guys are comfortable with? Did Nima cover that well enough? Oh, okay, so we don't have to do that. Okay. But it goes through that thing, and then we're in the view now, and we need the data, and so we could just view could fetch the data. But ideally, the controller, the project manager, gets the data and hands it to the view, which is the real thing that's doing the work for rendering the view. But the view should not be responsible for getting the data. It should just be given the data. It should be dumb. It's called dumb views or dumb templates, right? So I could do this, and that will work, and we'll make it work like this, and then we'll move it. So what do I expect now when I refresh the page? Will this error go away? Because sales is no longer nil, correct? What will happen? It won't find this constant. We have not defined this constant. This class does not exist. If I look for sale RB, there is no sale RB. I have not created the class sale. So I expect uninitialized constant to happen. It's kind of weird that it's not sale. It's like some weird nested sale. Really confusing. You have to understand Ruby a little bit more to understand why it's like action view compile template sale, because that's not really where it should be going, right? But in any case, we need the constant sale. So what are we going to do? We can create the file using touch, or we can generate a model called sale at this point. At this point, I think we need the model. We need the database, right? But notice how I deferred that until now, right? Not that you have to, but that's one approach. Now, I kind of made a mistake there because I want to be more lazy. I'm going to destroy that, undo that migration and that file, and actually redo it with, since it creates a migration as well as a model, I'm going to give it some fields so I don't have to write them out. So we're going to have the name of the sale, which is a string, but that's implied. And we're going to have the amount that it's off, so the discount amount, which is going to be an integer. Don't need fractions of percentages. And we have a start date. That's going to be a date. And an ends date. That's going to be a date. And I think that's everything, right? Start and name discount. Good enough for a simple starter. Agreed? And so now I know what my migration is called. It's called create sales. So of course I'll use Command P create sales to bring it up, make sure it's looking good. It's got the timestamp fields, the created at, updated at. The ID is implied. And so here are my columns. That makes sense. I feel good with that. I'm going to run rake db migrate, and I expect that to pass and create the table. Great. Now, I also know that it generated a sale class. So there's my class. It's because it's active record, it automatically grabs the columns, right? And it assumes all those are fields that you need to be able to read, right? Adder accessor type thing. Great. Yeah, absolutely. So what I'll maybe do is open up a create sales here. Command I ran in the terminal, sure, which is right there. Generate, I'm just being lazy, right? G for generate. So, but this is still probably review for you, I assume, or no? You've already generated a model, right? Which one? Category was already a model. Users you generated, I think, right? If you're there. If you're not there yet, then maybe not. Okay. I'm not sure if that's I guess an answer to the question from previously. Cool. So, how are we feeling about this? So far, so good? Any questions so far? So we have our model. What do I expect the error to be turning into? Will the constant be there? Sale. I don't know. I didn't restart my Rails app. Is that a problem? You're saying yes. I would argue no, unless you have some issues with Vagrant, right? Rails is nice enough, just like Webpack's autoloader, that it autoloads new files. It watches the directory. Could be. Now, Vagrant, because of I/O events like file system events, it needs to pull versus, anyway, long story. But you may have to restart your Rails app every now and then. But if you're not doing it in Vagrant, you don't have to worry about it as much. I expect that it finds the constant. Because it's active record, the query.all is going to exist forgot how to, oh yeah. Crap, I forgot how to go back to 1. What is it? There we go. I expect this method to exist because it's an active record class. I didn't define it, but it's inherited. And so I expect it to not find any sales. But it will still be valid. It's an empty array, essentially. And so it shouldn't fail. Now I should probably have some data to see how it looks, right? So at least like there's some data in the table. How am I going to create data? I don't need the form to create the data. I'm going to use active record. I'm somewhat comfortable with that. Rails console. Open up, make sure sale is a thing. Sale.first, yep, that works. Right? And I want to do sale.create. I'm going to do it with a bang in case if there's an error. I want to see the exception. And its name is, I don't know, what's coming up? Halloween? Is that already done? No, that's October 13th, right? The 13th? 30, yeah, of course, I knew that. I just got the numbers. Halloween sale. What's nice is I can just pass a string and it auto-converts that to a date time or date type. Maybe you want to start a little bit before Halloween. October maybe starts ends November 1st, 2018. And percent is it called or discount? Discount. Sorry. Discount, we'll say it's 30% off. So those are all my fields. Now, of course, they're not validated. I don't have validation, so I'm behaving well, making sure I'm not leaving anything as nil, although I could. Is that okay? I don't care. Anything else? I suck at spelling. All right. So here we are. We have our insert. There's a sale record. Now if I refresh the page, what should I see? Error, hopefully, right? Because I did the index, but I don't have the partial. So I should expect to see a partial error. Missing partial, admin sales sale. I'm going to have to create that partial. Because now there's data. It's like, OK, I got to go find that partial to render it at least once. Let's go ahead and create that partial, correct? And now the partial is there, but it's empty. Oh, well, it doesn't care if it's empty. We expect to see now essentially the page to work now, but we need to actually put some table rows or something in there. So I'm going to obviously be lazy again. And instead of copying, maybe I'll do, just for quick, table row, table data, maybe a few times. Something like that. Again, I'm working incrementally. I just want to see my changes, and I want to get that problem that I have in front of me out. The problem is I'm not seeing the actual row. I expect to see one row because I have one item in the table. So if I refresh, I expect to see one row now. And we do. Agreed? And then I can start adding data. Oh yeah, apparently I have access to a local variable the way that render works, I'm told. So let's just put in one thing. I don't need to do the whole thing. Again, working incrementally. I expect to see the ID of the sale. Right? OK, I know that one exists. And I know created at is always there too, right? So maybe like created at. All right? Don't worry about the column headers. Like, I know it's broken. Not the purpose here. We're trying to solve a different problem. Fine. If it's really bothering you, we'll fix that. So we have the sale. We'll have the name. So that'll be the name, I guess. It won't be call span 2 because there's no image for it. Name, discount, starts, ends, percent off, and I guess an empty one for any buttons. Is that OK? Oh, yeah. What am I doing? Yeah, that's good. There you go. You know what? I also want to add a status, because it'd be nice to know if the sale is coming up, if it's ending. Oh, sorry, if it's coming up, if it's active, all that stuff. It'd be nice for the admin to see like a colored thing, you know? Hit refresh. Great. I guess maybe created, when it was created, right? And so that's what we've got. We're going to quickly do that. So we've got the starts. And then we've got the ends. And then we've got the percent. And then we've got the status. Am I going to implement the status? Nope. I'm working incrementally. Not going to let things derail me there. Is that OK? Notice these little tricks I have, right? Again, it's the approach, right? Oh, yeah, the name. The name, I guess I have ID, so maybe ID is not that important. We care about name. Good call. Good catch. And maybe the name will become a link to the show page or whatever, but we don't have a show page, so we're not worried about it right now. Okay. Now, I want to focus on a couple things here. So far we're we don't have a form or anything like that. We know how to implement a form. We've done that with categories. We could talk about that, but I'd actually rather talk about the status thing because it's a good talking point. So how do I implement the status? I thought I muted you, but apparently I'm kidding. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, we need if statements, right? Because we're going to have different ones. So we're going to have upcoming, active, expired. Maybe those three. Those are probably the only states it can be in, right? Either it's coming up, or currently running, or in the past. Okay, so I'm going to need if statements. So we can just start with any of them, right? Like if starts on is in the future, so it's greater than date.current or date.today, but date.current is a little bit nicer to use because it takes into account the time zone of the app. We're going to say upcoming, so, right? It's in the future. We want to test that before I go further. I'm working incrementally, right? So if I refresh, I think the sale that I've created is upcoming, so I expect to see upcoming there instead of nothing, because for other sales it will not do anything, right? There's no else here. Nice. That code seems to work, although I haven't fully tested that because I haven't messed around with the dates yet, but it seems to work. I'm somewhat happy. Then I'm going to have sale dot, maybe I'll do the other one. If it ends on is less than date.current, then it's expired, or we'll call it finished. Expired sounds more harsh. And then the only other state, so I don't even have to check the dates. The only other possible state is it's currently active, right? I don't have to worry about is it between these dates or not, because that's the only other possible alternative now. So it's a little bit easier to do it this way than if I had gone for active first, one could argue. I don't see any change because, unfortunately, I don't have enough data to test with. So here, my dev brain should be going, I need 3 sales at the very least, or I need to tinker with that one sale. So let's just create another sale. Crap, I closed my console. Does console create save history? No, it doesn't for me. Damn it. Check this out. Expired sale, too lazy to think of a date. We'll just say starts on 20 days ago and ends on 10 days ago. And then percent, right? Discount is whatever, doesn't matter. That's good? Oh, actually, I'm missing that. So it's interesting error, though. It was a mistake. I didn't intend to cause that. But that error is not saying I'm missing name at the beginning, as Sebastian caught it. What is the error saying? Wrong number of arguments. What is it saying? Given to expected 0.1. What the hell is it saying? Somebody other than Sebastian, think about this. And tell me what you think. Yeah, how many arguments were we passing in to create bang before? One argument. It had many different keys to one hash. Again, think about what am I doing in terms of Ruby, because that will help you understand the error as well. So here, it became 2 arguments, a string followed by a comma with key value pairs, which Ruby assumes has the hash, the mustaches, the curly mustache-looking things, right? They look like mustaches. Yeah, it looks like a mustache, sideways mustache. Open stash, close stash. That's what I call them. You don't call them open stash, close stash? Look, it looks like a sideways mustache. I'm pretty sure that's a thing.
A mustache. Open stash.
I don't know. This is a can of worms. No, I have no idea what I'm doing. Okay. Maybe that's just me. Why are we doing create bang? Because we want to see the error in case there's validations. To be honest, we haven't defined any validations, so it will never really fail. Actually, yeah, it won't really fail. Create will silently fail and have the errors object in there that we can then inspect to what went wrong, but it'll still give us an object back if there's validation errors. Save returns false or true, but save with a bang will throw an exception, just like create with a bang will throw an exception. So it's when you have validation errors. You don't want to use that in your app usually because you want to like do an if statement and then show them a nice error message. But if you're doing like a migration or you're doing like a script, you want it to just like, I want to just crap out the entire app because I'm assuming this will not fail. So in my console, I'll tend to use the bang versions. Okay, let's fix that bug. Do we understand what this error was about? Can we move on? You guys with me or have I lost some of you? Yeah, with me? Okay. So we gave it 2 arguments, string and hash. It really wants 1 or 0 arguments. So we're going to go back. Sorry, not go back there. We're going to go back here, and we're going to do what we were supposed to do, which is to have the whole thing as a hash, which doesn't need the stash. And we're going to do another one for active sale. We started, let's say, 10 days ago. But it's going to finish 10 days from now. Is it from now? Oh, no, from now. Something like that, I forget. 10 days from now. Something like that. Let's see if that works. Works? Okay, great. So it ends October 21st. That looks right. Feeling good about this. I've got 3 sales, all with should have different statuses. If I refresh, I expect to see all 3 different statuses. Agreed? Okay. Did not write buggy code. That's great. I feel good. I want them to maybe have a little bit of a, some syntax, some colors. So maybe it will be a span. Let's see if this shortcut works. Span with a class label because it's bootstrap. And then label info, or label upcoming can be like label info. And then we would use the same thing for finished, except it could be label danger for the fact that it's red. And then active can be success for green. I forget if those are the classes. They seem to be. Okay. So that's looking good, right? Am I going too fast? I just figured those are less important things. You can Google those things, right? I just happen to know them. Don't be impressed by that. That's just habit, right? Do not be impressed by memory. That's not impressive. Impressive is iteration skill, right? So there's that. Is this code good? Are we done? Oh, did we move our? We forgot to talk about this thing here. We said it's not idiomatic Rails, right? So I can argue that this for sure should be in the control of the project manager that's going to get me the data. And then because Rails does its magic, it automatically passes that into the template, the action view layer. And action view automatically has access to all instance variables that are created here. So if I did that, it would have access to that, right? So that should still continue to work. And let's just make sure. I just moved a line of code. Always make sure. So we are here in our partial, and I'm asking the question, is this good code? And that may be a subjective question. I would argue it's not bad, but it's not ideal. It could be better. It could be more good. What do you think I'm referring to here? What could be better about this? Say that again? The styling should be separate. It's a good guess. You mean like the classes, for example? Because that's my styling, right? But this is an HTML file, and HTML files often have classes. I'm not saying style : color red. That might be an argument for like put your CSS in a CSS file. But I'm referring to an existing CSS class, so that's fine. Not terrible. But just to clarify what I was saying, if I was doing this, right? Then maybe I should turn that into a class, right? I think Menu's onto something, but he's not explaining it very well yet. If statements? We're specifically talking about what could be better here, not the rest of the partial. I think the other stuff is okay, is my argument. What could be better here? Anything from Calgary? Nothing yet. Come on, this is not Rails question. This is a think about things that you don't like about this as a dev or as a dev in training. There's no Rails trick here. So you're trying to take this from the perspective of, okay, I know that as a dev I should look for repetition and clean that up. That's one thing in terms of maintainability, right? Drying up your code. I don't see too much repetition here. Like I have date.current mentioned twice, but it's date.current. Like how else am I going to get the current date? Spans mentioned again, sure, but like I could slightly clean that up, but that might get even more confusing to read. So there's the maintainability and drying, but sometimes over drying is bad too, because then it's like more code to then make it dry or more confusing, more complex. So I would argue maybe not necessarily the thing you should be looking at is drying it up. Although you're onto something with drying it up. In here, I'm not being very repetitive. But what could this lead to in terms of repetition? Yeah, so like one of the suggestions from Calgary was like move the span outside, which is similar to what you're saying, try to dry up the span repetition. Okay, that'll give us a little bit of value, but not enough, in my opinion. It's not like I can avoid if statements here, right? I need to have conditionals here. I need to show different things. I'm going to need the spans to style it. I'm not doing anything. You need to think a little bit outside the box here. I use that term deliberately. Think outside the box. Yeah. Could it be that the logic should be in another place? What about responsibility? Let's forget about drawing and those things. Is this the right place? Just like with sales equals sales.all, which was business logic, data acquisition, like getting the data from the database, didn't belong in the view because views are supposed to be dumb. If they're supposed to be dumb, should they be doing business logic? No. So here, even if I put this in a partial, it's a great point. I could argue that this should be in a partial because there's some more meat here. So we could do that. But even then, if I put that in a partial, I have the same problem because a partial is a view. And the view is doing if statements, which is fine. But it's also, in those if statements, it's checking to see what constitutes upcoming. What constitutes expired. It's actually doing date arithmetic. Why? Think about now, we haven't gotten to it and we won't, but think about on the front end side. Let's say we want to show this again somewhere else. I'm going to have the exact same logic again. Oh, is the start date greater than the date.current? I'm now repeating business logic. If I need to change that logic, I need to change it in two places. I need to dry that up, right? So that in the future, I'm not repeating it and the view is not responsible for it. So how could I do that? How would I make this not be in the view? Move it in the controller, but the controller, is it its responsibility to do business kind of decisions? Or is it more of a project manager, a middleman or woman to basically just kind of exchange data, right? It's more just a, let me grab the data, let me pass it on. It shouldn't be doing too much business logic either. It's already dealing with the HTTP business logic, right? It's dealing with sessions, it's dealing with cookies, it's dealing with HTTP, it's dealing with getting the data and sending the data down to a template. I don't know if it should be in the controller. I would argue it should be in the sail model. Why can't we do this? That even reads better. I'm now asking the sail. The view is intelligent enough to know that this model exists, but not beyond that. It doesn't care how it calculates that. Just tell me, is it finished? Is it upcoming? I don't care how you tell me. Yeah, obviously, I need it to be a Boolean, but I don't care about the logic. And so what do I expect to happen when I refresh here? Right? Instead of going ahead and implementing that, I'm going to cause the error. Remember that rule, right? Cause that error, upcoming, not defined. I'm going to go into my sail model. I'm going to implement it. That's my path of least resistance. It's not the logic, but I want to make that error go away. Finished, same thing. Just arbitrarily deciding true or false here. Sorry, thank you. Now I expect this to work, but not work as expected. Right? But the methods are there. They're instance methods. So on an instance of sail, I can ask, is it finished or not? Now, arguably, I should also have active. I don't need it right now because I have an else, but you know, I can see why I should have that third state. So upcoming is starts on is greater, and finished is ends on is less than. Is that right? And now I don't do sail dot because I'm already in the sail. It's self dot ends on, which is implied. I don't need that. I can just leave it here so that you have a comparable, but not idiomatic, arguably. Some people actually say it's better to be explicit and say self dot here. So it depends on who you talk to. What about active? What's the logic there? Do I have to do the date comparison? Not upcoming and not finished, therefore active, right? But we're not testing it. So I would argue you want to maybe test that a little bit through Rails console or something, because we're not using that in the view. So I would put a to do here, right? Because I'm being lazy right now. I deferred that step. Does this help? Does this look better to us? Yes, because now anywhere in the code, even in my Rails console, I can determine if something is active or not once I reload it. Whoops. Right? I showed you another trick there with reload bang. It works in certain situations and not in others. But in this case, it makes sense. It reloads all those classes in memory again. So now all their definitions are there in memory again. Another thing, don't be impressed by these things. They're not important. Just showing you in case you want to be a little bit more productive with that stuff. So now anywhere in code, whether it's in a controller, in some other logic, some other file, I can ask if a sail is upcoming or not. I don't have to do the date arithmetic again. It's the responsibility of the model to tell me if it's what state it's in, right? Do we agree? How was this session? We didn't do the whole feature, but again, that's not my focus. What are the takeaways here? Yeah, universal rules. Universal rules rule, right? Like you need to really, in my opinion, if you want to be more productive in learning, really apply those things that I was emphasizing in weeks 1 and 2 and so on. That's what I want you to get out of this week is, yeah, I have those skills, or I understand that those skills I should have. Let me practice those more here. While the other objective of this week, getting comfortable with the reality of things, because I'll get to a job where I'll likely not know the framework. I'll maybe uncomfortable with the language, even if it's JavaScript. Let's be honest, there's so many flavors of JavaScript. It might be a TypeScript job. It may be a TypeScript-based code base. It's JavaScript, but with some extra things, you know? So you're having to deal with the discomfort of the language, whether it's PHP or .NET, who knows what it is, right? And then, of course, existing code base, exploring that. How do I look? Looking at the logs, you know, putting in, I didn't show you another trick. Let's say you're here and you're like, I don't understand when it goes into the if statement, right? Somebody else's code, I'm just using it as an example here. What could you do? What's your preference to figure out when it goes into here versus not? There's the debugger thing, which to be honest, I rarely use. I just do this. I just say, I don't want if I did a puts, I could do a puts as well, right? This is the thing you might decide, like console log equivalent. I just want to see it happen. So now when I keep this clear and I refresh, I see it in my console, my terminal, sorry. Great. But like, I had to like, to me that's more cognitive load, more stress. If I just want to just see it, I will just do raise, and I just want to see it right there. I don't have to switch to my terminal, find that line in a large log file. I'll just see it right there as the error message itself. Raise a string which has that content that I was going to put. Another really, really good tactic that you have kind of already learned, or if you haven't really fully turned it into a habit, you should consider that. Don't be afraid to cause errors to your advantage. Right? This is one example of that. This is my go-to. I don't use debugger. I'm like, why? I'm stepping through one thing at a time, right? So let's say I'm here. Okay, cool. It got here, but what happens here? I just move that line down. Right? Like that's not that much work. I don't have to now learn a debugger. Now this is one of those opinions that's like personal versus universal, right? So take it with a grain of salt. Okay, I've taken up enough of your time, and I don't have anything else from Calgary, so I will adjourn there. Hopefully that was useful, and enjoy the rest of your time with Jungle, even though it's going to be short. Cheers.
Being as fast as you are, do you ever get to think like, was that just
That comes with time. It took me years.